Peter Hitchens is here. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Incredulously, we had a junior doctor on with Julian Brewer this morning who makes, we think, around about 61,000 a year. His wife is a gastroenterologist who makes about 82,000. He said that they both had to have second jobs because they couldn't afford to work in the NHS anymore, and he couldn't afford to buy sandwiches.
Well, it is an extraordinary thing to say. I mean, people do have very heavy demands on their incomes these days, particularly from housing.
Yes.
Who knows what else?
They do.
But it does sound slightly surprising.
Far-fetched, I think, is the word you're looking for.
In that profession to say, but there it is.
As somebody suggested, maybe somebody could teach him at the hospital he works at how to make his own sandwiches.
Well, I have to say, it's a joy to make your own sandwiches.
Isn't it just?
Yeah, I make a very mean tomato sandwich.
I had a very funny conversation with my 18-year-old this weekend. Sorry to delay the start of the conversation, but I was off to the supermarket and I said, "Do you need anything?" And he went, "Can I get a meal deal?"
Can I get?
Yeah, and I said, "No, you can't get a meal deal." Why not? I said, "Because I don't buy them." I said, "What is a meal deal? Is a sandwich, a bag of crisps and a drink. I will make you a sandwich. I will buy you some crisps and a drink if you wish, but I will make the sandwich." And he sort of reluctantly agreed.
Well, I prefer to make my own sandwich.
I do.
Well, it's partly because all the bread used for sandwiches is either brown or sourdough.
Yeah.
And a lot of things don't sit well in brown bread.
Generally
speaking,
speaking,
what I say, something I really like, say a cheese and tomato roll on crusty white bread.
Yes.
You have to make it yourself.
With butter?
Well, of course.
And Branston?
Because you simply can't. Ordinary crusty white bread is almost unattainable from these expensive £5-a-go sandwich bars. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
You might as well do it yourself anyway.
But the meal deal that you get in a supermarket sandwich is even worse because it's been made in some god-awful sort of sandwich factory.
Well, heaven knows.
Off the coast of the Isle of Man or something,
and then probably chilled for 3 years and then released to you. And if you don't eat it quickly, it'll go.
He was very put out by the fact that I made him his own actual fresh bacon and chicken.
But it's
sandwich.
your job as his father to teach him about the archaic world.
I'm afraid I'm failing miserably.
No, never mind.
Anyway, let's talk about e-bikes. You'll probably want one of those.
Well, no, I wrote an article in the Spectator about them last week, and I got a fair amount of reaction. I can't tell you how annoying it is if you ride a proper bike. To see these things, which are actually electric motorcycles.
They're so quick, aren't they?
They're very fast and they're very heavy. So an ordinary bicycle weighs about 2 stone. An e-bike, one of these things you often find lying about on the pavement, the higher ones, weighs about 5 stone.
Yeah.
Because
they're so heavy.
Very heavy batteries. And people pretend, this is what annoys me about them, they pretend that they're bicycles, so they're allowed to ride in cycle lanes. Until they came along, there were a lot of really good new cycle lanes in London. The one along the embankment, the one that goes through Hyde Park, where you actually could ride your bike without any fear of being crashed into by a motor vehicle. Now they've got motor vehicles in them. Why is this? And this fantasy that they're emission-free. Of course they're not emission-free. They have to charge their batteries from power stations. If everybody in this country went over to electric vehicles, either cars, bikes, scooters, whatever it is, the power grid would break down because it simply couldn't cope with the charging demand. The idea that these things don't produce any emissions is nonsense. The idea that they give you an exercise seems to me to be
they certainly don't do that.
Far-fetched. And yet they're given the same status as bicycles, which won all these concessions eventually, precisely because they were healthy, non-polluting, clean, and these things.
And are they more dangerous as well because of their weight? They're slow. They don't slow down as quickly.
Well, I think when you're riding a bicycle, you want it to slow down. You do 2 things: you stop pedaling and you brake simultaneously. Whereas with any motor vehicle, there's the split second of braking distance where you also have to take your to reduce the power. It's harder to do, and they're heavy. I mean, do
they have a different braking system?
I wouldn't mind. I mean, with any braking system, there's a reaction time, but also they've got engines and they've got powerful momentum because they're so heavy. I wouldn't mind them being on the road with number plates on and people having to pass tests. I have a motorcycle license. It's quite a stiff test to get, and importantly because they're dangerous things to ride if you're not in control of them, and people should get licenses to ride them, and they should be made to have number plates like other motor vehicles. But of course, if that happened, there would be much less business around in hiring them out. You can ride them at 14, and I saw the other day in Kensington Gardens 2 or 3 kids who I reckon couldn't have been older than 12 riding these things about at some speed and quite erratically among crowds with small children in. I thought it was terrifying.
The thing that you also know about teenagers, and I've been told this by several people on pretty good authority, is that they've worked out how to crack the code of these rental electric bikes.
I'm afraid.
So when you hear them clicking, and you can see the kids on them, and they go past, and the wheels appear to be clicking, that means they've basically broken the system.
Is that what? Is that how you tell? I mean, it seems to me that I often see them going a good deal faster than the supposed 15.5 miles an hour, which is alleged to be their maximum.
Right.
In fact, the first time I encountered one, I was nearly spotted because I saw it coming on a pedestrian crossing by night. It looked to me like
you're
a
lucky to have seen it.
And I thought, oh, well, I've got time to cross, but I didn't, because it was going at least twice as fast as a bicycle, and I had to jump out of the way. And I've seen one in the City of London near St Paul's a few months ago on the pavement, being ridden at way over 25 miles an hour. It was terrifyingly fast and nearly hit me. And they're dangerous. And if we're going to have electric motorbikes in this country, they should be licensed. It's as simple as that. And
it really is.
But they're not.
But the cycling lobby is so sort of powerful, and I say that not because it's powerful within the country or the parliament necessarily, but it's powerful within individual kind of councils. Like, you know, the mayor of London has got a cycling czar.
Oh, yeah.
Many of the local councils have got kind of, you know, fresh air maniacs who make sure that cyclists are given priority in all ways.
Well, I'm in favour of that, Mike. I think there should be some voice for certainly the motor industry and the oil industry and all the other people concerned with transport. They have lobbies. I don't see why cyclists shouldn't have lobbies.
Well,
What's disappointed me
in terms
about
of use of the road, though, they don't have it.
Well, as I think we've discussed, I think some of the cycle lanes, the ones which were introduced during the Great Panic, were ridiculous, and they had to go, and I'm not in favour of that. I think there has to be a compromise, especially in what is basically an 18th and 19th century city like this, where you don't have many wide roads. You've got to compromise sometimes. So I'm not fanatical about that, but there has to be a voice for cyclists. What's shocked me is that the cyclists' voices have not really taken up this issue and said, well, actually, we spent 25 years getting cycle lanes for people who pedal their bikes. Now they're full of motor vehicles. Why are they there?
Well, you know why? I think it's because they see it as a slippery slope. Because I think if they saw that you could put a licence plate or some kind of registration on an electric bike, then the next thing that would happen was people like me would say, well, now it's time to put them on real bikes.
Well, they could say that, but I think the big distinction has to be between a vehicle with an engine and a vehicle without an engine. That's always what it has been. But since Grant Shapps was at the Ministry of Transport, that crucial distinction, both for e-bikes and the horrible e-scooters, which have their own problems we've discussed, have slipped underneath that.
Funnily enough, I haven't seen as many e-scooters.
Oh, there are a lot of them about.
Oh, there's still?
Oh, yeah, any student town, they're everywhere, and because they appeal to a crucial human desire, the laziness.
Yes.
You don't want to walk the mile and a half from the pub back to your bed sit, so you get one of these things.
Right. And I suppose
maybe you let your friend ride on it with you, the motorised tin tray.
And if it's cheap, it's fine,
No, they are. I'm afraid they are and will remain popular, and you'll see a lot of them, and they will be on the pavement behind you, and one day, whack. They're also fantastically good vehicles, of course, for muggers.
Yeah.
And can you imagine?
Well, that's the other problem.
So I don't think they've gone away. It's just that the e-bike has had a bit more prominence.
Yeah.
But I urge people, please read this.
I mean, I've tried, along with Nick Freeman and others, to put a petition through to Parliament, and we actually did get the requisite number of signatures to get it considered for debate, and then the answer came back, oh, we've already got one of these, so we're not going to allow it in, thanks very much.
But those are useless anyway. You get a debate, usually in Westminster Hall, and there's nothing happens, no legislation results from it. It's a sop. And I've given up. I used to take part in those petitions, but I've given up now, because all you get is a group of people having a conversation, and then nothing happens. The whole point of petitions
isn't that now where we are politically?
Very much so.
Everything goes around.
Given the illusions, like the BBC complaint system. Yeah. You make a complaint, they put you through this electronic rigmarole, and you think at the end of it you made a complaint. In fact, it's just lodged in the sort of spongy surface run, I think, by one of those, not Serco, one of the other Capita service companies. It's never even seen by anybody at the BBC. You have to complain about your complaint not being properly treated before your complaint is even seen by the BBC. Yeah. And that has to be escalated to something called the Executive Complaints Unit, rather grandly.
Of course.
And they can then reject it more thoroughly. Very occasionally they get through, but most people who make complaints to the BBC just get completely ignored. Yes. The complaint is, they register it, they think they've complained, but they haven't really.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading a piece in the Sunday Times this weekend about the Hugh Edwards affair, where apparently the BBC's kind of split down the middle between people who think he was badly treated, others who think that he should have been reported earlier. But meanwhile, the complaint process continues and will continue into the autumn, and nobody's really sure whether it will actually ever come to any kind of conclusion.
It remains a very odd case, I think.
Yes, it really is. Peter Hitchens is here. We've been talking about e-bikes and e-scooters. Let's take a trip over to Ukraine to see what's going on there. You've got a story.
Yes, well, I
piqued your interest.
Fascinated by this. I thought it was a major story. If it had been a story about Russia, it would have achieved enormous coverage. But as it was a bit down page and down bulletin. That a number of army recruiting officers in Ukraine have been charged with serious corruption. That's to say, taking considerable bribes from people to give them exemption certificates from military service. And at the same time, several thousand people have been caught trying to cross the border, usually into Romania, young men trying to avoid conscription, which suggests that quite a lot more have not been caught. Now, the interesting thing about this is, well, two things about it. One is that it suggests that the image that we have of Ukraine as being a country full of people enthusiastic about the war is not entirely true, that not everybody necessarily wants to do it. The other, that I would strongly suspect that the Ukrainian army has big pressures on its numbers because of very high casualty levels. Now, Ukrainians, quite understandably, won't give public details of their casualties. They just won't do it. But it seems to me that the Western media have been very compliant in just accepting this and saying, oh, well, if you won't tell us, we won't talk about it. But in Russia, the BBC Russian service about 2 months ago did an excellent piece of work. They studied local newspapers and news websites. They had, I think, satellite pictures of cemeteries, and they worked out, I think quite accurately, the number of military casualties in the Russian army, which is a good piece of journalism of the kind which has not been done about Ukraine. I just wish there would be more balanced coverage about this war. There's another thing. I mean, you see a lot about Ukrainian civilians dying as a result of Russian drones and bombs in Ukrainian towns, and it's quite right that this concentration should happen, because the idea you can have a clean war is ridiculous. There is no such thing as a surgical strike. But when, for instance, there's a lot of concentration on the Kerch Bridge, the big new bridge the Russians built to connect with Crimea, and it gets hit by the Ukrainians whenever they can. When it was hit in June, I noticed way down the page in the story that two people driving in their car were killed, and their 14-year-old daughter was left orphaned by this. This wasn't mentioned in the coverage of it. It was all just the Kerch Bridge has been hit. Again, it's not our job, it seems to me, to take sides quite so much in this war. All war is hell. Whoever's doing the shelling and the bombing, innocent people die, and it's quite right that we should cover this from both sides. And also, war is very costly. Young men in Ukraine now are under very big pressure to go out and get killed in what seems to me to be a war quite close to the First World War in terms of casualty levels, trench warfare and all the rest of it. Killed or maimed. And that's one of the main reasons why a lot of people, including me, would like to see this war come to an end. And the whole tenor of everything is, oh, this is a fantastic war. Ukraine is wonderful. Russia is bad. Let's carry on as it was a good thing. Whereas any sane person must surely want to bring it to an end.
And also, isn't it troubling that journalists today do leave things out of stories, and you hope not because of ideological reasons, but you do wonder whether they're leaving things out of stories for a purpose, because why would you? Well, I don't understand why you would.
But it's always about positioning as well, what you leave out, whether you put it at the bottom or the top of the story. This is what news outlets do, and it's wise for people to understand that it's going on. My late brother used to say that one of the reasons he worked in Fleet Street was so he didn't have to rely on the newspapers to find out what was going on. And it's true, you have to be a bit careful, don't you? Because the whole point of an adversarial press is that some of us will say one thing, others will say another, and if you read the lot of it, you'll probably get a more total picture than otherwise.
But you'll
it's the nature of it. I don't mind that. I think it's okay as long as you know what's going on.
As long as
in the case of war, in the case of the Ukraine, there is basically only one side in British media broadcasting, and the moment you step outside that, then you're immediately pelted with slime and mud and told you're a Putin apologist and all the other. I just don't care anymore, because it
really doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, but it's necessary to say sooner or later, and I think, is it 9 billion pounds we've spent on this war in this country, and we're constantly being told we can't afford this, the health service can't do that, we can't fix potholes in our roads, our own military is falling to bits. Well, we do need to consider, don't we, whether this $9 billion is actually a wise investment.
And also, if they are going to keep blaming Ukraine for everything, i.e. the price of, literally bread and milk, or the price of petrol, or the price of gas, or the price of everything, then surely it would be in their interest to end the war, wouldn't it?
Quite, and then there's
rather than continuing
other business of Ukraine struggling to export its grain, from which a lot of people are suffering. Well, in that case, the best thing to do, surely, is to bring about a peace under which the grain can once again be... War is an unnatural and unpleasant circumstance which should never be prolonged. And I just think there should be more public opinion saying, shouldn't we be thinking seriously about bringing this to an end? From
all sides, there's a kind of confusion as well, because I saw some footage over the weekend of some people sort of basically sunbathing on a beach in Odessa because it's apparently been opened up, and people going, oh, that's a funny looking war zone. Well, I've been in a war zone and it's not always at war. When I was in Bosnia, for example, the big sort of fighting had moved from Vitez to Mostar, and so Vitez was relatively calm. So you were actually, while in the midst of a war, able to sunbathe in a field and drink wine and do all the things that you can do in a normal place.
I think that's true.
But the point is, the war isn't everywhere all the time.
No, but if you're in a country whose army is being churned up in a very brutal meat grinder war, and if you're a young man, then I think wherever you are, it affects you, and I think this is why people are paying thousands of dollars, I think, to avoid being conscripted, and also paying quite heavy fees to smugglers to get them over the border.
I'm sure. Well, it happened in America. Why wouldn't it happen in Ukraine?
Yeah, but it's not. You see, it doesn't conform with the image that we're fed of Ukraine being a totally perfect, wonderful country in which nothing ever goes wrong, and everybody is totally committed to the war. It isn't. So I think that may be why it didn't make it didn't go very far forward. Whereas, as I say, I absolutely assure you that if a similar story about Russia came out, that it would be given quite properly. Big problem. And who doubts that people are paying bribes to avoid military service? But
also the nationality of people is interesting. I again, not wishing to just use one example, but I had a driver the other day take me to the airport who was from Ukraine, but he said his family were also in Belarus and also in Siberia. He said he came from those three places. So he said it's quite difficult to kind of have one view on one part of that country.
Well, there's more than one kind of Ukrainian, as I constantly try to point out. They're not all anti-Russian.
They're not all pro-Crimea. You know what I mean?
It varies immensely, and the language they speak varies as well. It's a complicated country, and again, people should know this.
Right. Let's talk about Jesus in a Porsche, because this is one of my favourite stories of the weekend. You wrote about it on Sunday. An advert basically for a very fast and expensive German car.
Yeah. And it was...
I think we've got the pictures.
It was...
Show us the first picture that was put out, which is a picture of, I think, a bridge, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a bridge in Lisbon.
Yeah.
And behind it is a very high statue of Jesus Christ.
A bit like the one in Rio.
Yeah, I modelled on it, I think, which dates, I think, from about 1959. It's supposed to be a memorial to that Portugal escaped the Second World War. And then it appeared, and then Porsche put it out again with the plinth of the statue there, and Jesus...
The plinth on its own looks ridiculous.
He said, and I'm not sure how many days afterwards Jesus was back.
Right.
One might guess it was 3, I don't know. But
do you think they had a lot of complaints from Catholics in Portugal?
I don't know what it got bad publicity, that's for certain. People spotted it and said, why is this gone? Yeah. And it's now back. But you have to ask yourself, why did they take it out in the first place?
Again, truth in advertising. Just don't tell lies.
Nobody's really said. I mean, one theory is that the bridge that they use is often used by advertising because it looks a bit like the Golden Gate. Yeah. But you don't have to slog over to California to take the film. But of course, there is no statue of Christ even next to the Golden Gate. But even so...
So does the Fourth Bridge. The Fourth Road Bridge. I mean, you don't even have to go to Europe for that one.
Well, no, but it doesn't quite have the architectural zing of this rather fine bridge in Portugal, or the more or less guaranteed sunshine. It's an interesting advert, by the way. It's sort of trying to do several generations of Porsches going on from the 50 years. It's worth a look, but it's extraordinary. Whenever people cut something out, as they always say, it's to cover up that gets you into trouble.
Exactly right. Now, having added something in, I must raise this with you. A church is thought to be the first in the UK to have a stained glass window depicting scenes from the COVID-19 pandemic. We've now gone full sort of Monty, haven't we? Whittlesford Parish Church in Cambridgeshire commissioned a £20,000 artwork to mark 1,000 years since the church was first built.
Well, I'm all in favour. I love stained glass windows.
These are not particularly great stained glass windows.
No, it's true. But I mean, if you go look in York Minster, for instance, there's a stained glass window with monkeys in it. They're full of fascinating stuff.
Yes.
And the stained glass windows in Chartres Cathedral in France are
I've been to Reims,
greatest art galleries in the world.
Where they've got stained glass windows by Chagall or something.
Yeah, of course. And they're great. But I'm not against it. But I think if they're going to have a stained glass window about the COVID panic, they should have one showing the church being closed so no one could go to it.
Yes, I mean there is something to mark.
For churches was the main experience.
Yeah, exactly right.
Sorry, you can't go to church.
Right. Unbelievable. Finally, Julian Assange. Obviously, we talked about it last
I'm still
week.
trying.
You're still trying. You wrote about it this week again.
I get this,
any movement?
I get this antsy feeling that there's going to be. It's the very dead of summer. There's going to be a sudden final court decision, and then the Home Secretary will say, "Yep," and off he will go. And I say, so if you are concerned about this, I just beg you, please, now is the time to write politely, briefly, and numerously to the Right Honourable Suella Braverman, Home Secretary, and say, please don't do this, because as we know, Theresa May refused to extradite Gary McKinnon, in my view, quite rightly.
Yes.
And what happened? Did the United States
just gave up, didn't they?
Stop trading with us, or do anything horrible to us? Nothing happened at all, because the fact is that if you stand up to the USA, as General de Gaulle of France proved many years ago, you stand up to the USA, they treat you better than if you cringe to them. And it would be wonderful if Suella Braverman distinguished herself down the ages, actually, if she refused to do this. Completely wrong extradition. The wrongest thing about it is it's political. People should not be extradited to other countries for what are blatantly political offences.
No.